Small businesses looking to upgrade their technologies and use technology to scale for growth face a lot of challenges and obstacles along the way, but it doesn't need to be difficult. And what I want to do today is share with you a complete training course for small businesses on how to deploy new technology to automate their businesses. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world to reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And over the years, we've worked with hundreds of different clients, ranging from small, tiny companies to large multinational, multi-billion-dollar organizations. And a large subset of the clients we've worked with are small and mid-sized organizations. And working with small businesses is somewhat of a passion of mine. I'm used to working with large companies. I enjoy working with large companies. But there's something about small businesses that have a soft spot in my heart. And I enjoy it. I run a small business myself. I enjoy working with our small businesses because I enjoy the entrepreneurial spirit and the high growth factor that goes into these projects. And I also enjoy the fact that these small business owners and teams have opportunity to use technology and business process improvements to make their businesses better and to scale for growth and to take their small businesses to even greater heights. So what I want to do today is share with you a training course that I've put together that provides you some guidance and some deep dive training into what you need to do to be successful in your small business technology initiatives. Whether you're looking to deploy ERP systems or a customer relationship management system or a financial system, a human capital management system, supply chain, AI, whatever it is, this training is intended to help you identify what the right path forward is for your organization, as well as to give you some guidance on how to plan and execute on the implementation of whatever transformation it is that you are going to go through as an organization. And the way we've structured this training is broken down into a few different modules or segments. First, we're going to talk about how small businesses are generally leveraging technology to improve and automate their businesses and scale their businesses. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that organizations face when they're moving off something like a QuickBooks. So we'll talk about specifically small businesses that are using QuickBooks or a smaller financial and accounting system like QuickBooks, some of the challenges they face moving from that type of solution to a broader, more robust solution. So we'll set that foundation first early in the training, and then we'll dive into more around the types of technologies that you should be considering as a small business team. And just keep in mind as you're going through this training that we and myself at Third Stage Consulting are not affiliated with any software vendors. We are completely tech agnostic, we're independent, and we help clients through their small business initiatives as well as larger businesses as well. But we want to share with you a tech agnostic view of the pros and cons of some of the common technologies that small business owners throughout the world are using. Once we've done that, we'll talk more specifically around what you can do to be successful in your implementation. And we'll close out the training with a case study of one of our actual clients. We're going to dive into an hour-long case study with one of our small business clients that went through a complete implementation, starting with the evaluation and selection of new technology, as well as the planning for that technology and the implementation. And we'll talk to one of our team members that was involved in that client project to give you sort of a capstone case study of how small businesses can be successful in their digital transformation and technology initiatives. Now, if you'd like to learn more about how to be successful in your small business digital and technology initiatives, I've included a number of small business resources below in the description field of this video. I encourage you to go check that out. Just go to the links below. There's a digital transformation report. There's a book that covers lessons from 1,000 different digital transformations, including a number of those transformations that were with small businesses. And you can also find other small business technology resources in the links below. So be sure to check that out as part of this training as well. A lot of the small businesses we work with are on QuickBooks. They're using QuickBooks or QuickBooks Enterprise. They've grown and scaled the company to a certain point, and they reach a tipping point or a ceiling where they can't really effectively move beyond QuickBooks. They can't scale the organization without updating that technology. So what I want to do in this first segment is play you a clip of a video or of a training where I talk about the things you need to consider as you're thinking about replacing QuickBooks or whatever financial or accounting system you might be using, whether it's Xero or some other accounting system. It doesn't matter if it's QuickBooks or Xero or something else. It's more a matter of the things you need to think about as you're moving away from this more core, basic, vanilla accounting system to a more robust system that's going to help you scale for growth. The first thing to look at, and the first dynamic that we often see with these smaller, high-growth organizations, is that when they first start the organization, when they are a lot smaller, they can usually use the capability of QuickBooks to help improve their spreadsheets or their paper-based processes, and it works fine. But then the financial processes get more complex. You start adding more transactions, your period end close becomes more complex, your reporting needs becomes more complex, you start getting into more sophisticated product costing or project-based costing, things of that nature that really stress the limits of QuickBooks. And that's oftentimes one of the first areas where organizations start to see pressure. So there's a couple options here. If you are focused on the financial and accounting aspect of your organization, there's a lot of other systems out there that are more robust, more complex, and more sophisticated to help you grow and scale your finance and accounting function. So for example, you have accounting software such as NetSuite or Microsoft Dynamics as two common examples for smaller organizations that can be a nice step up from where you are today with QuickBooks. And the beauty of those two solutions and other ERP-based solutions or enterprise resource planning solutions is that they not only can help you with finance and accounting, but they can also help you with other parts of your business as well. And I'll talk about those points here throughout the rest of this video. Another common pain point or challenge that growing organizations face is the whole aspect of inventory management. Now, QuickBooks does allow you to manage inventory. You can track inventory in QuickBooks, but it's fairly limited in what you can and can't do. As you start to open more distribution centers or more manufacturing shop floors, or as you expand the number of SKUs that you have and number of products that you offer to different types of customers, chances are that you're going to outgrow the capabilities of the inventory management capability within QuickBooks. So then the question becomes, what other types of technologies can help us fix that part of our business? And if inventory management is one of your main concerns, especially if it's also in conjunction with the financial and accounting concerns that I mentioned before, again, potential enterprise resource planning or ERP systems are a great place to start. In addition to systems like NetSuite, Microsoft Dynamics, you also have SAP Business One. If you're a manufacturer, you might look at Epicor or Infor as common systems that can help mid-size organizations handle inventory management better. And those are just a few examples. And by the way, if you're looking for rankings of different types of ERP systems and different types of industries and environments, I highly encourage you to check out our 2021 Digital Transformation Report. And I've included a link to that below. And in that report, you'll find a bunch of rankings and reviews of different ERP systems in the marketplace. And these are independent, objective reviews that our team has done. So when you're looking at inventory management, really look at potential opportunities to automate those areas in a way that gives you more sophisticated inventory management capabilities than what you might have with QuickBooks. Another common pain point for growing organizations is e-commerce, especially if you're in retail and distribution, or if you're selling direct to consumer or direct to other businesses. E-commerce capabilities is one area where other types of technologies can help you really grow outside of what QuickBooks was designed to do. Now, there's two different paths you can take here. There's your standalone e-commerce systems like Shopify, which is a very common one that is meant just to handle e-commerce. But there's also your ERP systems, as I mentioned before, broader systems that can handle not only e-commerce, but they also handle financials, inventory management, and other aspects of your business. So if e-commerce is important to you, even if you're not a retailer, even if you're not selling direct to consumer, it may be that e-commerce can be a great way to help you provide a better customer experience and help you sell more even to other businesses or other organizations if you're not selling direct to consumers. So think about e-commerce as one other area that you want to evaluate as you look at potential replacements for your QuickBooks solution. In addition to the areas we've talked about so far, there's a whole host of other functions within your organization that might benefit from other types of technology that QuickBooks is not able to help you with. So for example, if you're a manufacturer, manufacturing-based business processes are something that can be critical in making sure that you can track inventory, track work in progress, track design of different products. If you're a make-to-order manufacturer, it helps you track the way those products are going to be built. If you're make-to-stock, it helps you forecast demand and figure out how much you should be producing. But even if you're not a manufacturer, there's other areas you might be thinking about. If you're a sales-driven organization, or if you have a sales staff, you might be thinking about Salesforce automation or customer relationship management, which is also known as CRM software. Those are a certain category of technologies that can help you automate your sales processes, help you track your pipeline, help you track customer service that you're providing to your potential and current customers, So that's where examples like Salesforce CRM come into play. But you also have other types of customer service types of systems like ServiceNow, which can help you provide a better customer experience and help you track contacts that you have with your customers. So those are just two of many examples of ways that you could automate your CRM or your sales or customer service processes. Another example is supply chain management. If you're buying products overseas or from other manufacturers, or if you're tracking logistics and inventory throughout the world or throughout your supply chain, there is standalone supply chain management systems like Blue Yonder and Manhattan Associates that just do supply chain management. And then of course, as mentioned before, you also have your ERP options, which provide broader capabilities, including supply chain. And then finally, if you're a growing organization, chances are you're starting to think more about HR and human capital management. So there's technologies out there that really hone in on the human capital management aspect of things. So Workday is probably the most popular one we see, but you also have SuccessFactors and UltiPro and other types of HCM or human capital management technologies to help you track candidates, to help you track the onboarding process, training, performance reviews, all that stuff that consumes that entire process of identifying resources, hiring them, and then managing them throughout their life cycle with your organization. So HCM, again, could also be a standalone system like a Workday or UltiPro, but it could also be a module within a broader ERP system as well. So I provided a bunch of options here and a bunch of ideas on different types of technologies that you could think about as far as replacing QuickBooks. Now, how do you find the right solution for you? And I wish I could tell you there's a simple answer or there's a best answer for you, but the reality is that every growing organization has different needs and different priorities. So the key is to really objectively look at and evaluate your different options, prioritize your different options, and figure out which one best meets your needs, best meets your budget, your risk profile, your desired future state, all that stuff. And to provide more information on that, I've included some resources and links below that I hope will help you in your evaluation process, even if it's just educating yourself on potential systems that are out there. So I encourage you to check out some of the links below for more information. Now, we started off by sharing some of the general things to consider as you're looking at potentially moving away from your accounting system, whether it's a QuickBooks or Xero or any other accounting system. What I want to do next is talk about the different categories of technologies that are available to small businesses. You may have heard me use some buzzwords and terms and acronyms in this video so far, things like ERP and CRM and human capital management, financial systems, supply chain management, AI, a lot of different acronyms. And what I want to do in this next segment is unpack those acronyms and those buzzwords and talk about what each of those technologies are and how they might fit within your business, so that ultimately when you go through your evaluation process, you're not focused on technologies that don't make sense for you. You're focused on the types of technologies and the category of technologies that make the most sense for you based on whatever your priorities and growth objectives are. So with that being said, let's dive into the leading types of technologies that small businesses are most likely to use to scale their organizations for growth. One of the most fundamental core technologies that you need as a small business is financial and accounting software. So whether you're using QuickBooks or some other sort of financial and accounting software, it's really important to have a clear record of where cash is going, what your expenses are looking like, what the trends are, what your profitability is, what your revenue top line is looking like, and really just having a good handle on your financials and the numbers behind your business. Now, every successful business I know of is very successful and effective in managing their financials, managing the numbers, understanding the numbers, and really doing what they can to fuel profitability. And there's systems out there, there's plenty of technologies out there that will allow you to enable some of this accounting and financial aspects of your business. Small businesses at times are at a disadvantage because we don't have the big brand names or the big marketing budgets, advertising budgets that bigger organizations might have. So marketing automation can be a great way to keep close to your customers, to have a dialogue with your customers, to engage with your customers and your potential customers, and really understand who your target audience is and what their behaviors are, what their interests are, and ultimately convert more people into customers for the first time and ultimately repeat customers as well. And marketing automation software such as HubSpot or Constant Contact is two examples. There's also some larger enterprise software options that I'm going to get here to in a few minutes in this video that will also allow marketing automation. But the idea here is that we want to have a dialogue with our customers It could be via email, social media, website, blogs, all of the above. Whatever the case may be, technology that helps automate your marketing and helps you be more effective at your marketing and have more one-on-one conversations with your customers can be one of the most powerful technologies that a small business can use to drive its growth. Now, similar to marketing automation, there's also customer relationship management software, or CRM software. This is software that allows you to track individual customers and potential customers, understand where they are in the buying cycle, what past purchases they may have made, what opportunities there are to sell more services or products to this potential customer, and really have a deep understanding and tracking of what your customers are doing and what your sales efforts to date may have been. Now, CRM software is particularly effective for companies that are maybe lower volume but higher price tag types of transactions. So, for example, auto dealerships or professional services firms that sell to large organizations, for example, companies that aren't selling hundreds or thousands of orders a day or a week or a month even, but companies that have lower transactions but higher dollar figures where there's more to gain or lose by individual single transactions. CRM software can be extremely effective at making sure you get the full ROI from your sales efforts, and also to ensure that you're converting more customers into repeat customers and converting more prospects into customers for the first time. Now, I've included some links below that will provide you some helpful resources for CRM types of software, as well as some of the other technologies that we're talking about here today. So I encourage you to check out those links below. Now, another important piece of software for some organizations is going to be supply chain management and inventory management software. So these are technologies that help track if you're ordering products or goods from other vendors, or if you're a manufacturer where you've got to buy parts and materials, you're going to manufacture something or construct something. Supply chain management can help you manage all that stuff, the inventory, the procurement of the inventory, your warehouse management, basically whatever happens to your raw materials from the time you buy them until you manufacture them, or whatever it is that you do with the parts and materials that you're buying. There's a lot of different supply chain management, inventory management systems out there. I have a recent video that outlines the top 10 supply chain management systems. I encourage you to check that out. It's an agnostic review of the top 10 supply chain management systems out there. That'll help you identify some of the options in the marketplace, some of the leading supply chain and inventory management systems. You can also use bolt-ons to QuickBooks and other types of the technologies that we're talking about here today. They provide either third-party or bolt-ons in many cases that will allow you to track inventory and do some light supply chain management. So take a look at what you might already have in place and see if there are any bolt-ons, or if you're looking to replace any of those systems, you could look at some broader supply chain management systems like we're talking about here today. Now, another technology that's very effective and very important for small businesses, especially those that are growing and that have a high number of employees or are labor intensive, is going to be human capital management systems. And think of these as HR systems, but they're really HR systems on steroids. They track not only your employees and benefits and payroll, but they can also help you automate things like performance reviews. They can help you with tracking vacation time. They can help you with recruiting, other types of activities, anything related to managing a workforce and the whole hire to retire process. As you consider some potential HCM systems, I encourage you to check out some links below. One link in particular I've included to a video and a blog that outlines the top HCM systems in the marketplace. You might want to check that out as you're looking at potential HCM software for your small business. Now, if the technologies we've talked about so far today all sound appealing to you, and it sounds like you might need or want automation for multiple parts of your business, you may also want to consider enterprise resource planning software, or ERP software as it's often called. ERP software is the type of technology that ties together your entire operation. So your financials, marketing automation, CRM, all the stuff we've talked about here today are all very important components of ERP. And the thing that small businesses often like about ERP is that it provides you one system that can provide all the different functions that you're going to need as an organization. Now, the thing to keep in mind is you may not be ready for an ERP system, although an ERP system could help you scale and you can grow into an ERP system in the future. So really you have to look at what are the pros and cons of one single big ERP system versus having individual technologies for some of these different areas we've talked about. And there's definitive pros and cons to either approach. And I've included some links below that'll help you assess some of those pros and cons of each. But regardless, consider ERP technology as an option, especially if you're a high growth company or you've already experienced a fair amount of growth. ERP technology can be a great way to pull that together. I also encourage you to check out a link below that I included to the top 10 ERP systems for small businesses. That'll give you some ideas on what some of the leading ERP systems are in the industry right now. I've given you many options here to think about, some general categories of systems that you could be considering for your business. They're not mutually exclusive. You don't have to do them all. You don't have to do just one. You can do some combination of multiple systems. But whatever you do, you want to have a clear roadmap for what it is you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to get there. So the next question becomes, how do we define that roadmap and how do we select the best technology for us? Well, there's a number of things you can do that I've outlined in some links below in some videos and articles. But in general, you want to define what your needs are today, what you think your needs and requirements are for the future. You want to prioritize those needs. Then you want to objectively evaluate your different technology options, whether it's HCM or CRM or financials and accounting, ERP, whatever the case may be, or it might be all of the above. But whatever the case, you want to evaluate your options against your specific business requirements and needs and what you think those needs might be in the future. And once you've done that, then it's time to define what your transformation plan is and how you're going to implement that. In the previous segment of this training course, I talked about some of the major categories of technology that small businesses use. And probably the most common category that we see small businesses pursuing is ERP, which, if you recall from the previous segment, is enterprise resource planning. ERP is a single system that covers your entire operations, from financials to inventory management to order processing to warehouse management, maybe even manufacturing or planning. All the different things that you might need to do as a small business is one single system that integrates all those different functions within your business. And that's sort of the utopia of scale for small businesses. One single system that ties together all your data, all your operations. It's one platform. It's a lot less to manage. And so it's not a perfect fit for every organization, but most small businesses that we work with are interested in at least exploring possibilities with ERP systems. So what we want to do in this next segment is talk about whether or not the general category of ERP is a right fit for you. We're not going to get into the specific vendors yet. We will in the next segment. But in this segment, we're just going to talk about, is ERP the right fit for you? Is that something that makes sense for your small business? We'll talk about the pros and cons of ERP systems to really just give you an unbiased, objective view of this general category called ERP, which is so common with small businesses in high growth environments. The first thing to think about as you're evaluating whether or not your organization is the right size for a new ERP system is the overall cost benefit of a potential ERP system. And here's where it's important to look at the cost, the benefits, and the risks of deploying a new ERP system. So for some organizations, implementing a big ERP system might be cumbersome, it might be too expensive, and it might be too risky. For other organizations, it might be that they're investing heavily in growth and they're focusing heavily on the business value that they'll get out of that investment longer term. So at the end of the day, the really important thing here is to really understand what it is you're trying to accomplish as an organization and where you're headed as an organization. If you're a small mom and pop with incremental growth throughout the years, it may not make sense to invest a ton of money in a new ERP system if you don't have big growth ambitions. However, if you're a high growth company, or if you have grand ambitions, or you've got private equity investment in the company, it might make more sense to take that time to invest in a new ERP system to help you scale for growth. And then obviously it's also important to look at the business benefits. What kind of business value could you expect to get out of a new ERP system? And this is where you look to things like your top line revenue growth. Could an ERP system help you drive more revenue? Could a new ERP system help you drive cost efficiency and cost effectiveness throughout the organization? Could it allow you and your team to be more effective and help you build a more profitable company longer term? The key here is to really recognize what those potential business benefits are and ultimately quantify them in a realistic and an objective way. Just as an example here, if you're a small or mid-sized organization that's using QuickBooks or some other basic accounting system, you have to look at what is the incremental advantage of implementing a new system to replace that QuickBooks system or that accounting system that you might be using. A lot of clients we work with are using an accounting software like that can't handle inventory management, manufacturing, warehouse management, sales automation, and some of the more robust capabilities that a broader ERP system can handle. So the key here in this example is to quantify what those incremental business value improvements might be relative to the cost that you might invest in a new ERP system that you might upgrade from QuickBooks or some other accounting system. Now, if you're looking for more information in a deeper dive into how to build a business case and a cost-benefit analysis for an ERP system, I encourage you to check out this video right here on my YouTube channel that talks about how to build a business case and define the business benefits for an ERP system. If you're a small or mid-sized organization, one of the benefits of ERP software in general is that there's a lot of options to choose from. You don't necessarily have to go out and buy SAP or Oracle or even Microsoft Dynamics 365 or some of those other big ERP systems that are really expensive and potentially risky for your organization. Instead, you can find smaller ERP software options, smaller solutions that are right-sized for small and mid-sized organizations. So in other words, it may be that you don't want to consider SAP S/4HANA or Oracle Fusion ERP or Microsoft D365. It may be that those ERP options are too large and too complex and too risky without justifiable business value to go along with it. But instead, what you may do is look at some of the other options in the marketplace. You have systems like Oracle NetSuite that is a cloud-based solution that focuses on small and mid-sized organizations. You also have open source ERP systems such as Odoo or ERP Next or OpenERP that are good options for organizations that are looking for smaller, lower cost, higher value types of systems. And a lot of these systems too that are smaller and right-sized for small and mid-sized organizations are ones that allow you to grow into it as well. So in other words, they can scale with your growth, but they don't require a huge upfront investment necessarily for your ERP investments. So the key here is to recognize what those best options are for small and mid-sized options. And if you're looking for a better feel for what some of the leading ERP contenders are for small and mid-market organizations like yours, check out this video here. It's the top 10 ERP systems for small and mid-sized companies. It's an independent and objective ranking of the top systems that we see work best and get implemented the most often with small and mid-sized organizations. And the beauty of these top 10 systems and other ERP systems that are designed for smaller and mid-sized organizations is that they allow you to not only have a platform to scale for growth, but it gives you an option to incrementally improve your business to where you don't have to change overnight and you don't have to make a massive investment overnight as well. Now, if you're still convinced that ERP systems are too big or too complex or too expensive for your organization, it may be that you look at a different direction, which is the best of breed types of solutions or the point solutions. Those are two interchangeable words that describe a type of technology that isn't all inclusive and all integrated as one system, but instead they're point solutions or focus solutions that do certain individual things within an organization. So for example, instead of deploying one big ERP system that does everything you want it to do for your entire business, you might deploy one technology that handles CRM or customer relationship management, or you might deploy a system that does HR and human capital management. You might have a solution that focuses on supply chain management or just on manufacturing, warehouse management, et cetera, et cetera. So the list goes on, but the point here is that there's a lot of different options in the marketplace that are not full-blown ERP systems, but instead they're smaller, more focused solutions that are more targeted that might give you an option that's a lower risk and a more incremental way to deliver business value within your organization. And the beauty here, of course, is that you can also start to add on or piece together different systems that address different parts of your business. Of course, the downside risk is that over time you may end up with a proliferation of systems that now have trouble talking to one another. But at this point in your growth cycle, it may make sense to start with point solutions because it's lower risk and potentially higher value. So consider point solutions or best of breed ERP systems as another option that you might consider when you're looking at potential technology to help your business scale for growth. So far in this video, I've talked about smaller ERP systems that cater specifically to small and mid-market companies. I've talked about point solutions and best of breed solutions, and an even less invasive type of option, if none of those sound good to you so far, is the interoperability or business intelligence types of solutions. And these types of solutions are even less invasive than some of the other options I've talked about because they don't require you to necessarily rip out any technology you already have in place. If you're already using QuickBooks or Xero for your financials, for example, you might be able to deploy a system that brings together the data from that system as well as other systems you're using throughout your organization, and it gives you a platform to be able to build from and to grow from. So you can continue to add new technologies and expand your technology stack using an interoperability or a business intelligence tool set to tie together those systems and give you the visibility you need into your overall business operations. Two popular examples of this type of technology are Palantir and Snowflake. Those are two common vendors in the marketplace that are focused on interoperability and business intelligence. They're not meant to replace your back office systems or provide a direct substitute to ERP systems, but instead they're meant to tie together multiple technologies and to play nice in the sandbox with different types of technologies. So consider interoperability types of solutions as one example. Now, if you're looking for more information and details around Palantir, which is a good example of a type of software in this category, check out this video right here. It's an independent review that I did recently of Palantir. It does sort of a deep dive into the strengths and weaknesses of the product. And even if you're not interested in Palantir, it'll give you a sense of the types of technologies that are out there that are alternatives to ERP systems. Now, assuming that you're interested in pursuing or exploring one of the leading ERP systems or one of the leading enterprise technologies, such as customer relationship management or human capital management or even supply chain management, we have put together a list of the top 10 systems that are ERP systems for small businesses. We base this list specifically on the needs of what small businesses need, which is a lot different than mid-market and even larger enterprise organizations. We wanted to focus here on what are those systems that are most suitable for small businesses in general. Now, as you're watching this next module, keep in mind that this is a cross-industry, cross-geographic, cross-industry size sort of evaluation of ERP systems of all types of small businesses, whether you're a $5 million company or a $100 million company. So it's a very broad range of company sizes, industries, and needs. But generally speaking, these are the top 10 systems that we see most commonly effectively used by small and mid-market organizations. So with that being said, let's dive into this top 10 list, knowing that this may not fit your exact short list, but at least gives you a flavor for the types of systems that are out there, the specific vendors that are out there, and some of the leading contenders of technologies that you might consider for your small business transformation. What we did is we looked at our experience with companies that are in the small and mid-sized market, which in general we classify as companies less than 500 employees, and look at what are the comparisons of the different systems out there that we see small businesses most likely to succeed with. Some of the criteria we use to rank these different systems include things like the total value of the system, the functionality, the ease of implementation, the estimated cost, general functionality. Those are some of the things that we use to objectively rank the different systems in the market. So without further ado, let's dive into the top 10. Coming in at number 10 is a ERP system called DCOM. Now, DCOM is a very simple to use ERP system used quite a bit by the small and mid-sized market, also used by some larger global organizations as well. But we find that its ease of use and ease of implementation to be a good fit for a lot of smaller organizations. This is especially true for organizations that have either manufacturing capabilities, distribution, supply chain intensive types of needs. Those types of organizations often find that DCOM can be a great fit for these organizations. So although the software can scale for larger organizations, many of our small and mid-market companies that are in manufacturing, distribution, supply chain related organizations find that DCOM can be a great fit for their organizations. Coming in at number 9 is Salesforce. Now, many of you may think of Salesforce as a CRM only system, customer relationship management, which is true. Salesforce does do customer relationship management, and it's relatively easy to implement for organizations that are looking to automate some of their sales and customer service types of processes. But in addition to providing CRM capabilities, Salesforce also has an ecosystem of third-party applications that can fill out the breadth of requirements for an ERP type of capability. So for example, Financial Force is a system that handles financials, ties into Salesforce on the CRM side of things, and allows you to combine your financials, your customer relationship as an example, but there's also other third-party applications that are available as well. Now, Salesforce is a fairly flexible type of software that can integrate well with other applications. The downside of it, though, is that there can be some complexity in implementing it and maintaining that software just because of the flexibility and the ability to integrate with other systems. It requires a certain amount of technical sophistication and maturity within your own organization to manage that going forward. So you really have to look at, do I have the internal IT capabilities to support something like that? But if you do, and you're a sales-driven organization, and CRM in particular is very important, in addition to some of the other ERP capabilities, then Salesforce can be a great fit for you. Now, another system we commonly see in the mid-market, especially in manufacturing or distribution or retail types of organizations, is Epicor. Now, Epicor is a system that's been around for a long time. They've focused in a number of different industry verticals like manufacturing, distribution, retail, like I just mentioned. but they've also provided a number of other capabilities that can be suitable for organizations. Now, while Epicor is commonly used in the small and mid-market, there's a pretty good adoption rate in the mid-market. There's some uncertainty around the viability of the company in general and the product in general. There's been no announced plans for the company to retrench from any of its product offerings. The company's been around for a long time, but when compared to some of the other vendors in the marketplace, there's questions about what the long-term viability and roadmap might look like, at least in our opinion, observing the market for the last 20 years or so. But regardless of that, Epicor can be a great fit for your organization, especially if you're a retail shop, if you're a manufacturing shop, distribution, and Epicor also has a number of different products that can fill different needs for different types of organizations. So all those things considered are enough to land Epicor number 8 on our list. Coming in at number 7 is QuickBooks Enterprise. That may sound unusual for some of you. Some of you may be watching this video to try and find a replacement for your QuickBooks Enterprise. But the reality is that a lot of startups, a lot of smaller organizations use QuickBooks. And the reason for that is it's become kind of a de facto accounting and financial software package for small and mid-sized companies. What's also further increased the adoption of QuickBooks has been the add-ons and some of the third-party systems that extend the functionality and capabilities of QuickBooks. For example, there's a product out there called Fishbowl. Inventory management ties into QuickBooks and allows companies to add some more advanced inventory management capabilities to their QuickBooks Enterprise capabilities. Now, even though QuickBooks is widely used by small and mid-market companies, and we've seen the product scale up to, I believe, $200 million in revenue is the largest client that we've seen use QuickBooks, we find that many organizations will at some point outgrow QuickBooks. And so if you're an extremely high growth organization, or you have ambitious plans for growth, or if you've been established for a while and you're looking for longer term growth, you may want to consider other options in the top 10, because we spend a lot more time helping clients replace QuickBooks than we do helping them to upgrade or to improve the capabilities they have with QuickBooks. Now, with all that in mind, that's enough to land QuickBooks Enterprise at number 7 on our list. Coming in at number 6 on our list is SAP Business One. This is a product that's been around for quite some time. SAP actually acquired the product about 20 years ago and has really used this as its penetration of the small and mid-market. SAP has S/4HANA, which tends to focus on the upper mid-market, larger organizations. Business One is designed more for small and mid-market companies. Now, the good news with SAP Business One is a lot of small and mid-sized companies use it, especially in parts of Europe and Asia, Asia Pacific, Latin America. It's widely used, not quite as much in North America, but it is worldwide commonly used by many small and mid-sized companies. The thing that's holding Business One back from being higher on our list is that there's some questions about the long-term viability of the product. With SAP focusing so much of its time and R&D dollars and resources and marketing and sales on S/4HANA, I have some questions around whether or not Business One will be around for the long term. And we found through past experience that a lot of software vendors can only support so many products, and especially ones that are going after big enterprise customers, and the fact that SAP is so entrenched in trying to secure its footprint with larger enterprises leads me to question whether or not it will invest appropriately in Business One for the small and mid-market. But despite all of that, enough companies out there use it. It's suitable enough for small and mid-market companies that's enough to land SAP Business One at number 6 on our list. Coming in at number 5 on our list is a product called Priority Software. And it's probably one of the lesser known ERP systems on our list, but it's something that's very well suited for small and mid-market companies. Now, the company itself was founded in Israel and is quickly expanding its footprint from outside Middle East and Europe to North America and other parts of the world. And it's a product that's very easy to use, very intuitive, relatively easy to implement, has a great user interface. There's a lot of good strengths that come along with this product. It's also strong in areas such as manufacturing, distribution, complex supply chains. Those are some of the differentiators for Priority Software. Now, one of the other things that's strong about the product is that it has a pretty cool mobile development app that allows you to, without actually coding anything, create mobile apps based on the software and the data that you have in the actual Priority database or the Priority software. So that's a unique differentiator for companies that have mobile workforces or have mobile capabilities that they want to embed within their organizations. Now, the biggest thing holding back Priority Software are a couple things. One is it's not very well known. Secondly, They're still expanding their implementation footprint and building out an ecosystem of partners that can support the product. So there's not a lot of resources out there that can support the product. But if you're a small, mid-sized company, you'll probably get more attention from a company like Priority, and there's other upsides that could outweigh some of those downsides that I mentioned. With all of that in mind, that's enough to land Priority Software at number 5 on our list. Coming in at number 4 on our list is Sage Software. This is a company that's been around for a long time and has focused almost exclusively on the small and mid-market space, ERP systems for the small and mid-market space. And they have a couple different products. They have Sage 100 Cloud, Sage 300 Cloud, Sage X3, which X3 is more for some larger, more complex organizations. But the reason I bring this up is they have 3 primary offerings that can help mid-size and smaller organizations navigate whatever capabilities they're looking for. And so the product tends to be strong in financials, inventory, distribution, HCM, CRM, that sort of thing. So it really is a complete product, pretty well established, pretty mature product. And we find a lot of companies that are in manufacturing, distribution, inventory management, intensive types of organizations tend to do pretty well and find a good fit with Sage. So if you're one of those types of organizations, Sage would be a good product to at least consider on your short list. With all of that in mind, that's enough to land Sage at number 4 on our list. Now, coming in at number 3 on our list is Odoo software. It's another product that you may or may not have heard of, and it used to be called OpenERP. It's one of the leading, if not the leading, open source ERP systems, and in fact, the only open source ERP system to make our top 10 list. And it's highly adopted by small and mid-market companies across the world. Very easy to use, very straightforward system. Has very straightforward pricing, which a lot of small and mid-market companies appreciate. It also allows you to do a lot with it. There's a lot of flexibility in Odoo in terms of integration and adding applications and working your way and growing your way into the full capabilities of the software. A lot of the other systems in our top 10 list require you to implement a broad cross-section of functionality in order for the whole thing to work, whereas Odoo is built more modular to where you can implement module by module as your company grows and expands. Now, the downside of Odoo is that it requires a certain amount of focus and attention. It's an open source system, which is good news. That provides a lot of flexibility, but it requires very much of a hands-on implementation approach to figuring out how you want this all to work for your organization. There's a little bit more legwork from the, call it the end user perspective or the functional implementation perspective. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're an organization that's growing very quickly and you don't have a lot of IT staff and you don't have a lot of bandwidth to be messing around with software, trying to figure out how to implement it and manage it day to day, that can be a little bit much for some organizations. And the other part of it is that it doesn't have as much predefined business processes and workflows as you might find with some of the other vendors in the top 10 list. So those are some things to think about or some trade-offs that come along with it. But given the fact that so many organizations use it and it is flexible, easy to use, focused on the small to mid-market, that's enough to land Odoo at number 3 on our list. Coming in at number 2 on our list is Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. Now, Microsoft D365 has 2 versions or 2 primary versions of the product. One is called F&O or Finance and Operations, which is for larger organizations, and then you have Business Central, which is more for small and mid-market companies. Business Central is a little bit more focused, a little bit more simple, a little bit more vanilla, and it can be more suitable for an organization that isn't overly complex. Now, one of the benefits of Microsoft Dynamics is that the product itself is fairly flexible when compared to some of the other larger vendors in our top 10. It's easy to integrate, relatively speaking, and it's also something that is used by a lot of organizations, and it's commonly compared to other shortlist options for small and mid-market companies. Now, the downside of Business Central is its flexibility can sometimes be a liability. Just because you can change the software more easily doesn't mean you should, and that's one of the challenges that a lot of small and mid-market companies have with implementing a product like Microsoft D365. The other downside, and probably the biggest downside risk of implementing Microsoft D365, is that the value-added reseller ecosystem of partners that can help implement the product is very much fragmented, very inconsistent. There's not much control over it. So you really have to vet those partners very carefully because there's a lot of poor quality implementers out there. There's some good ones, but you have to wade through a lot of the poor ones to get there. So all those pros and cons being considered is enough to land Microsoft D365 Business Central at number 2 on our list. Coming in at number 1 on our list is NetSuite, a product owned by Oracle and supported by Oracle. And NetSuite is a SaaS multi-tenant software as a service product. So it's in the cloud, it's multi-tenant, meaning lots of different companies use the same instance of the software. You obviously get your own ability to configure and tailor the software for your own individual needs, but it's more of a vanilla standard type of ERP system. Now that can be a good or bad thing depending on what type of organization you have. If you have one that is a fairly vanilla organization in terms of its back office operations and you're okay with it just adapting to the way the software works, then it's not a problem. But if you have a complex organization or you really value flexibility or you have things that are super unique to you as a small business, NetSuite can be somewhat constraining or limiting. The other downside of NetSuite is it can be expensive. When compared to some of the other products we talked about in the top 10, NetSuite is one of the higher cost ones we found in terms of software licenses and ongoing subscription fees. That is something that can be negotiated. Independent third parties like Third Stage can help you negotiate that, but in general, we find that the cost is higher oftentimes for NetSuite. But all of that in mind and all those things considered is enough to land NetSuite at number 1 on our list. So those are the top 10 systems in the market, but how do we pick the best one? Well, first of all, it's important to recognize that that top 10 list I just went through is the top 10 for small businesses of all different types, different geographies, different industries, different cultures, and your unique culture and focus and strategic goals and objectives will lead to a different list and different sets of strengths and weaknesses based on what we just went through. So it's really important to look at what type of company you're trying to be. Are you a high growth company that's looking to scale quickly? That might lead you to a different set of shortlist options than if you're more of a steady Eddie, steady growth type of organization or a lifestyle business or one that intends to remain smaller than others. That's going to lead you to a different answer. So it's really important to take all this with a grain of salt and have an objective view of what it is you're trying to accomplish to define the needs that are unique to you to help you land at the ideal shortlist. Now, in our top 10 list was a product called Oracle NetSuite. And Oracle NetSuite is a company we are not affiliated with. We're not affiliated with any of the vendors we just talked about in the previous segment. We're not affiliated with NetSuite. We're not affiliated with Odoo, which we're going to talk about next. And we're not affiliated with any of the vendors that we talked about in that top 10 list. However, I want to dive into NetSuite and Odoo just as more of a case study and an understanding of what the pros and cons are of different small business technologies. Even if you're not pursuing NetSuite or Odoo, this will be a helpful exercise to hear because you'll understand what the considerations are as you're evaluating different systems in the marketplace. Now, having said that, NetSuite is something that's commonly used by a lot of small businesses. In fact, it's one of the leading, if not the leading, ERP system for small businesses throughout the world. It's owned by Oracle. I'm going to get into a lot more detail here in just a second. But I want to share with you this deep dive that talks specifically about Oracle NetSuite to share with you the strengths and the weaknesses and the trade-offs so that you can start to learn how to think about these different technologies and how to understand what the strengths are as well as what the weaknesses are. It's really important to understand both. And so it may be that you come out of this module wanting to pursue a look at Oracle NetSuite, or it may be that at the very worst case scenario that you just are understanding how to evaluate technology a little bit differently. So with that being said, let's dive into the pros and cons of Oracle NetSuite. So first, it helps understand what exactly NetSuite is and to give you a bit of an overview of the product. It's a product that's been around for about 20 years, and it was actually one of the first, if not the first, pure software as a service or cloud-based ERP systems. And that was quite revolutionary back in the early 2000s or the late 90s when the company first started. Today, it's not so unique, but back then it was. And so NetSuite has grown up in the cloud. It's grown up as a multi-tenant software as a service, subscription-based type of solution. And they've gone aggressively after the small and mid-market ever since their inception. Now, they were recently acquired by Oracle to really fill out Oracle's suite of products. So Oracle has their Oracle ERP Cloud, which is intended for the larger organizations. And now they have NetSuite, which is intended for small and mid-sized companies. Now, despite the fact that NetSuite is number 1 in our top 10 ranking, it's not for everyone. It may be a great fit for your organization, or depending on what your needs are, maybe it's not. So what I want to talk about are some of the pros and cons of the product itself. Now, the first pro, and probably the biggest advantage that the product provides, is the fact that, as I mentioned before, it is a native cloud solution, which means it's a lot more mature than a lot of the products that are just now trying to rewrite their systems for the cloud. So in a lot of ways, NetSuite has a 15 to 20 year head start on developing enterprise technologies for the cloud because this is what they've always done. So that's one of the big advantages, is that maturity of the product and the fact that it's a SaaS-based or a cloud-based ERP solution. The other advantage of the product, given that it's a SaaS-based solution, is that there are some very standard workflows that can really help a company scale, especially a smaller, high-growth organization that's operating with QuickBooks or spreadsheets or a combination of all of the above. NetSuite provides a certain amount of standard business processes and workflows that will allow you to scale your organization faster than if you were to continue with some of the more manual business processes. And then finally, one of the biggest advantages of the product is that it is generally considered a pretty big step up from QuickBooks and Excel spreadsheets and the tools that a lot of small and mid-sized companies are using early in their growth cycles. And so it can be a pretty good entry point into the world of ERP for a smaller mid-market company that hasn't deployed ERP technology in the past. Now, some of the downsides of the NetSuite product, there's two in particular. The first is that it is a standardized product, which is generally considered a strength, but it can also limit your flexibility. So when you compare the flexibility of NetSuite to other products in the marketplace, there are other ERP systems out there that are more flexible than NetSuite and give you more options to how you can deploy some of those workflows. And one of the other disadvantages of the product is that it is generally not as diverse and robust as some of the other ERP systems in the marketplace. So if you are a high growth, complex, diverse organization with a lot of different needs and a lot of complex business processes, it may be that NetSuite is not the best fit. It may be better than what you have today, but it may be putting you in a situation where you're just going to limit yourself longer term. So you really want to look at the complexities and the nuances of your business and make sure that you vet out whether or not NetSuite can handle those capabilities. Just to give you a couple examples, some areas where we see NetSuite lacking compared to some of the other competitors in the marketplace would be things like manufacturing or advanced planning, warehouse management. So if you're a complex engineer to order manufacturer, for example, there's probably better systems out there that can give you what you're looking for. But if you have more vanilla and standard business processes, then NetSuite can be a great fit for small and mid-sized organizations. One thing that NetSuite is very good at is marketing this whole concept of suite success as it relates to their implementations. And what suite success is a pre-configured version of the software that's specific to any given industry. So there's different industry verticals where Suite Success can give you a starting point of how the software can be configured and deployed. And it's really meant to be a way to accelerate and fast track the deployment of technology. So on the surface, this is a good thing. This can be a great time and money saver. But the reality is that we see with most NetSuite clients is that setting up the technology isn't what takes the most time and money and the most heartburn to get done right. Typically, it's the actual organizational changes, the operational changes, and actually moving the organization along to be able to fully leverage NetSuite. That's what takes a long time. So when you hear about Suite Success and you hear the sales and marketing messaging behind that, you just want to make sure you take that with a grain of salt and recognize that it's a sales tactic. It's a very effective sales tactic, but chances are you're going to need a more realistic approach and implementation plan to ensure that you get the full value out of the product. Now, implementing NetSuite is relatively easy from a technical perspective. It's a SaaS solution, as I mentioned before. You can literally overnight have an instance or a sandbox of NetSuite set up for you that you can go start playing with and start using. And so on the surface, it sounds pretty easy as far as deploying the technology. But again, the point is, how do we deploy the technology in a way that's going to work for our business? And there's a lot of complexities that go into the product as far as setting up workflows and setting up all the configuration that needs to go with it. Even though it's not as robust and complex as some of the other ERP systems in the marketplace, there's still a lot of decisions that need to be made and a lot of operational and organizational change that your organization would need to go through to adapt to NetSuite. And one of the challenges we see with NetSuite customers in general is that most of them are smaller and mid-sized companies that haven't gone through a lot of ERP implementations in the past, so they don't necessarily know what they're getting themselves into as far as how difficult some of the changes may be and how difficult the deployment may be. They may see that they get immediate access to the software and they start playing with the software and assume that it's going to be easy to roll out to their entire organization, which may be true if you're a very small organization, but if you're a larger small company or a mid-market company, it's probably going to be a little bit more complex than you think. So just making sure you have a realistic plan and a realistic strategy to deploy the product is something that's very important in making NetSuite implementation successful. So the first step to being successful in a NetSuite implementation is, first of all, to have a realistic plan. Make sure that you take the sales proposal that you receive from NetSuite or one of their value-added resellers with a grain of salt, because chances are they're being a bit overly optimistic with some unrealistic assumptions around what the implementation is going to look like. So you want to make sure that you objectively look at the plan and develop a plan that makes sense for you as an organization. The next thing is to really poke holes and understand where the limitations of the software are. Even if you've already settled on NetSuite, you want to make sure you understand where the gaps are, because those gaps are going to be what could potentially derail your project, and it could be the things that potentially disrupt your business as you go live on the product. So understanding the weaknesses of the product are arguably just as important, if not more important, as understanding what the strengths are. And so that also helps you identify potential needs you might have to plug the gaps with additional third-party technologies, or create some sort of workaround, or bolt on a legacy system, or do some heavier hitting sorts of customization to the technology. So making sure you have a realistic plan, have a clear strategy, and identify those risks and limitations of the product, all those things are going to be first steps towards making your project successful. And then finally, don't forget about organizational change management. We hear all the time from small and mid-sized companies that change management won't be hard for them and that people are going to embrace this change without any problem. But the reality is this is probably going to be a big change for you, especially if you're moving from QuickBooks or Excel spreadsheets or manual processes, whatever the case may be. So just make sure you have a clear plan and understanding of how you're going to manage change and manage through some of those organizational difficulties. Now, we just gave you a little bit of a deep dive into Oracle NetSuite, which is a very common small business ERP software. Another common ERP software is a product called Odoo. And Odoo is an open source system that's European based, and they're getting a lot of traction throughout the world. And they've recently had a big investment from Google's parent company called Alphabet. I believe they invested about $500 million in the organization. So they have a lot of money and resources behind them, and they're growing very quickly. And the reason I want to share this product with you and this review with you is because it's a totally different product from NetSuite. We shared about some of the strengths and weaknesses of NetSuite. The strengths and weaknesses of Odoo are much different because it's an open source, more flexible system, which has its advantages, but there's also a dark side as well, and that's what we're going to dive into here in this next segment. One of the biggest advantages of Odoo is its flexibility. It's built to be very modular and flexible. You can implement parts of the solution, you can implement the entire solution, and it gives organizations a good way to grow into the ERP system, so they don't necessarily need to bite off the entire system. And unlike its bigger ERP system counterparts, it is something that can be implemented piecemeal, and it allows you to grow into the ERP system. And not only does that modularity provide maximum flexibility, but so does the fact that it's open ERP, which means you can access the source code, you can change the software more easily than you can some of the other ERP systems in the marketplace. And it also allows for easier integration to some of the other systems out there. So if you need any third-party systems to bolt onto your core ERP system, it makes it a bit easier to do that. So if flexibility is something that you value as an organization, then Odoo ERP can be a great option. One other thing that my team and I really like about Odoo is its ease of use. It's something that's not too hard to figure out. It's not rocket science. It doesn't require a huge amount of training to get used to. It's pretty simple. It's got a clean, slick GUI or user interface. So in terms of adoption and changing your organization and changing your technology, it can be a bit easier for organizations to learn and a bit more intuitive. In addition, it allows for non-technical types to support and maintain the system longer term. So if you need to integrate with other systems, or if you need to change the general workflows or the general fields of the system, it allows non-technical types to be able to do that. So ease of use is something that's also a value to Odoo ERP. In terms of cost and total cost of ownership in particular, Odoo leads the pack in terms of its total cost of ownership. And part of that is because the software itself is priced generally lower than a lot of systems out there. It's not free, it's not completely open source in that regard, but it is something that typically is priced a bit lower than other systems out there. It's also one of the only ERP systems, if not the only ERP system I know of, where you can actually try it for free. You can try a limited version of the software for free just to get a handle for the look and feel, which is a pretty nice way to test it out and see if it might fit your capabilities or just to get a general feel for the product. And then when we look at the total cost of ownership, including the cost to implement the product, that cost can tend to be lower than other ERP systems as well because of its ease of use and its ease of implementation. So all of those things considered are something that give Odoo a leg up against much of its competition as it relates to total cost of ownership. Now, we've talked about a few positive things and strengths of Odoo, but one of the downsides or potential downsides of the product is scalability. So if you're an organization that's in high growth mode, or you're a larger organization, or you're a complex organization, you have a very high level volume of transactions across the organization, it can be a bit limited. So some of the more complex, bigger organizations find that they've outgrown the system or the system just can't scale to meet their needs. Having said that, we see a lot of organizations in the small and mid-market that are high growth that can reach millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in revenue and still be able to leverage the capabilities and use the software to get maximum value out of it. So if your goal is to scale as an organization, you're extremely high growth, or you're a larger organization, you may find some of the functionality and the general scalability to be somewhat limited. Now, another consideration when you're evaluating any sort of ERP system is what kind of ecosystem is supporting that product. And Odoo is a relatively new company. It's not a brand new company, but it's not as established as some of the larger ERP vendors. And so as such, they don't have quite as robust of a partner network of implementers and people supporting the product and third parties supporting the product. So that can be a consideration as well, is that you still need outside help. Even though it is easy to use, you'll still likely need some sort of outside consulting and help to implement the product. So making sure you identify potential partners and that you're comfortable with potential partners in your part of the world is something you'll really want to dig into if you're considering Odoo. And this comment really varies by geography. We found that certain parts of the world have more robust partners and consultants and third parties in general that'll support the product, whereas in some parts of the world, United States or North America, where I'm based, for example, you don't find quite as much support yet for the product. But having said all that, it's something you want to consider as part of your evaluation. So despite the fact that there aren't a lot of third-party consultants and resellers and implementers that support the product, there are a lot of organizations out there using Odoo. There's a fairly large install base, which is a good indicator of the overall vendor viability as an organization, Odoo as an organization, as well as the R&D dollars that they're spending on the product. You always want to look at how many companies out there are using the product. You don't want to invest in a software where there's not a lot of companies using it, because that means less R&D and less advancements and innovation in the future. With Odoo, they do have a fairly large install base, which gives them R&D dollars, and it gives buyers comfort that there's going to be innovation in the future. And one other side note is that of all the ERP systems out there, I would say that Odoo probably has the most cult-like following of any ERP system out there. A lot of people are adamant about the strengths of Odoo. I get messages all the time about people wanting me to do reviews of Odoo like this one, people commenting how great Odoo is. So I think there's a lot of companies out there, a lot of consultants and individuals out there that feel very strongly about the value of Odoo. Now, one other thing to consider, or one caveat if you're looking at Odoo, is to think about, do we have the internal resources to support an open source system, a system that we may need to maintain and support more than some other types of ERP systems out there. So while on one hand it's an easy product to use, there's a nice user interface that's easy to figure out, it allows even non-technical type of people to maintain the system and support the system, it does make it a little bit more challenging if you're a smaller or high growth organization to ensure you have the right level of capabilities to be able to support the product, because there's likely going to be more pressure on your internal IT resources and even some non-IT resources to be able to support the product in your organization longer term. So if you're a small or mid-sized organization, Odoo ERP is one that I typically would recommend for a short list. If you're looking for some of the strengths that I mentioned here today, such as flexibility, and you're looking for ease of use and that sort of thing, Odoo can be a great option. But regardless of which direction you go, it's always good to get an independent view and a comparison of Odoo against other ERP systems out there. So I encourage you to check out some of the resources we've included below. Now, another very common product in the small and mid-market is a product called Sage X3. And Sage is a vendor that has long focused on the small and lower mid-market segment of the industry. And that's something that's really important, because generally speaking, small and mid-sized organizations don't want to buy a product that's too complex, too cumbersome, too risky, too costly, all that good stuff. But Sage X3 is something that's designed for the small and mid-market. So it's somewhere in between, I would say, a NetSuite and an Odoo, which are the two products we just reviewed before this. Sage X3 is a little bit different because it's not quite as rigid as an Oracle NetSuite, but it's not quite as flexible and open source-ish as Odoo. It's kind of in the middle. So we wanted to give you this as sort of a counterpoint to the two extremes of Oracle NetSuite and Odoo. So with that being said, let's dive into some of the pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses of Sage X3.
Sage X3 is actually one of three major products that Sage as a software vendor provides. There's Sage 100 Cloud, which is sort of the small business version of their ERP system, which is meant to target companies that are upgrading from QuickBooks or some other sort of basic financial system. And then you have Sage 300 Cloud, which is more for larger small businesses or maybe even some of the mid-market. And then Sage X3 is more the flagship product that's Sage's version of its more robust and broad solution for larger, more complex mid-sized organizations. So what I want to do today is talk specifically about Sage X3, what the pros and cons are, and help you figure out if that might be a good solution for your shortlist as you evaluate potential ERP systems for your organization. Now, we help a lot of clients throughout the world evaluate and implement all sorts of different technologies. Being an independent software consulting firm, we're able to objectively look at all the strengths and weaknesses of different systems out there. And when we look at Sage X3 and having helped so many clients select and implement the product, we find that it has a heavy concentration in the manufacturing and distribution space. In fact, that's the vertical or the set of verticals where we see Sage X3 most commonly. So organizations that are producing some sort of product, manufacturing some sort of product, and that have fairly complex supply chain and warehouse management needs, those are the types of organizations that are going to benefit the most from Sage X3. So manufacturing and distribution is the most common area where we see the product, and that includes food and beverage, which is a very common customer base for Sage X3, as well as industrial products. We see it occasionally in aerospace and defense. Some consumer product companies will use it as well. And really, within manufacturing and distribution, it's targeted to those mid-market companies. So these are typically companies and industries that are too big to use QuickBooks or some more vanilla, smaller ERP system, and they're not so big that they need the cost and the risk and the complexity of an SAP or an Oracle or maybe even a Microsoft Dynamics 365. So it's pretty well positioned in the middle market for manufacturing and distribution firms. We see a lot of private equity owned or family owned types of manufacturers and distributors use the product. A lot of them range anywhere from 50 million in annual revenue all the way on up to 500 million in annual revenue. So there are no hard and fast criteria for what makes this a good fit for those types of organizations, but in general, it's going to be the mid-market manufacturing and distribution companies that benefit the most from Sage X3. Now, in order to be successful and to provide a viable solution for high growth, mid-size manufacturing and distribution organizations or other types of organizations that might use the product, you need to have a certain amount of breadth of capability. So in other words, Sage X3 is much more than just a finance and accounting system. A lot of companies do use Sage as a beefed up version of QuickBooks or other types of accounting software, but its real value lies in the other stuff that it does beyond finance and accounting. So when you look at inventory management or CRM or warehouse management, actual manufacturing shop floor processes, those are the breadth of capabilities that the product provides. And because Sage isn't trying to be everyone to everyone, it can do those things pretty well. So while SAP and Oracle and Microsoft and some of those bigger software vendors are trying to tailor their solutions for all these different industry verticals, Sage isn't a great fit for everyone. It's fairly focused on a certain number of verticals, a certain amount of capabilities and functionality. And so if you're an organization that fits within that space, some of those things that I've mentioned in terms of functions and workflows, then Sage X3 can be a great fit. Now, having said that, if you're a larger organization, you're a Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 organization, or if you're a global organization with a complex global supply chain, you're probably going to find that the capabilities of the software are a bit limited. and you may be better off looking at a Microsoft or a Oracle ERP cloud or supply chain management cloud, or something like an SAP S/4HANA if you're a much bigger organization. But if you're a mid-market organization, you don't have super complex or unusual types of processes compared to other organizations out there, then Sage X3 can be a great fit for your organization. Because Sage isn't trying to be everything to everyone, and because it's not a super complex product, even though it can handle some broad capabilities, it's not as complex as an SAP or an Oracle or one of those other big ERP vendors. It can be deployed most commonly at a lower cost. And there's less complexity to deal with, which means it takes less time and effort and heartache to deploy the technology, which will lower your costs in the short term during implementation. And also, when you look at longer term maintenance of the software, it can be relatively easy to maintain the software. And the key word is relatively, because no ERP system is easy to maintain, but it can be easier than maintaining an SAP or an Oracle. And it also doesn't require you to have super technical competencies on your staff. So if you don't have a big IT department, or you don't have people on your staff that are developers or that sort of thing, you can still roll out the software and effectively use it and maintain it over time because of its relative ease of use. So in my opinion, Sage X3 strikes a really good balance between the smaller tier 3 types of ERP systems that are very narrowly focused and very vanilla and basic. And on the other extreme, you have the big complex ERP systems that are costly and risky to roll out. Sage is sort of right in the middle there, and they play very well in that space. And I consider them somewhat of a gold standard for mid-sized organizations that aren't quite ready, nor do they have the need or the appetite to upgrade to a bigger ERP system. They're a great tier 2 alternative for the mid-market. With all of this in mind, the question becomes, is Sage X3 the right fit for your organization? It all depends. If you're a mid-market organization that fits within some of the sweet spots we've talked about here today, it can be a great fit. If you're an organization that's looking for a simpler, more cost-effective alternative, and by the way, a more flexible alternative than some of the larger tier 1 ERP providers, then yes, Sage X3 can be a great fit. If you're a bigger, more complex, more diverse global organization, you may find that you will outgrow the capabilities or don't have the capabilities that you need within Sage X3, in which case it may be better to look at one of the tier 1 options or one of the bigger ERP systems in the marketplace.
Now, a lot of the small and mid-market companies we work with are owned by private equity firms, or they have a large investment from private equity firms. And this creates a different dynamic in small businesses that are going through a transformation. Reason being is, first of all, the PE firms are often more likely to be the ones to create the need and the urgency for a new ERP system, because they're looking for an opportunity to scale and automate the organization and get to the next level. And secondly, they also recognize that the company that you are is more likely to potentially be acquired by or merge with another organization that's using an ERP system. So there's a lot of reasons why PE firms want there to be an automation or an ERP system as part of their growth strategy, but it's important to recognize what some of the nuances are of going through an ERP project or a technology implementation within a PE-backed environment. So with that being said, this next segment will be relevant to those of you that are either already owned by a PE firm, you have an investment from a PE firm, or you're looking at the opportunity to seek investments from a PE firm. The first thing to understand in terms of defining a digital transformation strategy and roadmap that makes the most sense for your organization is to make sure you fully understand what the goals and objectives of your organization are. And usually with private equity owned organizations, the goals look different and oftentimes they're more aggressive than the goals of other organizations. And the reason this is so important is because it will heavily influence, or should heavily influence, your overall digital strategy, the types of technologies you might consider, and the way you deploy those technologies. For example, if you're an organization that's trying to scale and you're trying to standardize operations and you've grown through acquisitions over the years, you're going to potentially want to move towards more of a standardized target operating model, which would suggest that you might go look at potential single ERP systems that can help you do that. Or if you're an organization that has a lot of different locations, or you operate in different countries and you have a heavily localized strategy, you might find that more of a best of breed, flexible type of technology approach is going to make more sense. And just those two examples, or the contrast between those two examples, point to very different digital strategies, very different technologies and implementation approaches that you'll want to consider. So that's just one example of how you want to define what are the organizational strategies. How fast are you looking to grow? How much do you want to standardize? What is your future state organization going to look like? And really defining those goals at a high level so that your digital transformation aligns with those high level goals. Another thing to consider is what exactly are your technology options? What type of technology or technologies might you be considering as you look to automate and increase business value within your organization? Now, oftentimes organizations that are private equity owned will come in and say, hey, we want to put in a full ERP system to tie together all of our operations. But that's a very vague statement, or that's a very vague need. You have to define in more detail what type of ERP system might you be looking for. Are you looking for maybe a big expensive ERP system that might potentially give you more business value in the long term? Or are you looking to sell this investment in just 1 or 2 or 3 years and you want to get this done as quickly and as inexpensively at as low of a risk as possible? Those are two different profiles of two different types of transformations that you really need to think about and consider as you're going through your transformation. Now, we work with some private equity firms that are thinking longer term about really building value over 5 or 7 or more years. We have other clients with private equity involvement that they're just focused on the next 2 to 3 years. And for the latter, those ones that are focused in the shorter term, they don't want to take on typically a high degree of cost or risk to implement new technologies. So you really want to understand what your options are within each of those extremes, and certainly you might fall somewhere in the middle, and really understand objectively what are the best options out there. You might be looking at ERP systems, you might be looking at customer relationship management technologies or HR technologies, supply chain management technologies. There's a whole host of different types of technologies out there. And for more information on this, I've actually also included a link to our digital transformation report, which gives you an overview of different types of technologies out there, as well as rankings and ratings of different types of technologies for your enterprise needs. So I encourage you to check out that link below and download that to give you additional best practices and reviews of potential technologies out there. One of the most challenging parts of digital transformations that involve private equity or private equity owned firms is that private equity owned firms just in general tend to move at a faster pace and a more aggressive pace in terms of wanting to grow and achieve business value. So there's a certain amount of impatience that goes along with that, and there's also a certain amount of unrealistic expectation that goes along with that too. So when you're thinking about your digital transformation, the last thing you want to do is cram in a project that's going to take a lot longer or take more money than expected, try to cram that into a box of something that's unrealistic. You want to make sure you have a realistic understanding of what your options are and how long it's really going to take and how much money it's really going to take and what the risk really is. Those are some of the things you want to keep in mind. And so you want to objectively evaluate and take with a grain of salt what software vendors might tell you it's going to take in terms of implementation time and cost. And when we think about what causes implementation failure for any sort of organization, whether it's private equity owned or not, one of the biggest root causes is that unrealistic expectation. If you have unrealistic expectations about what you can or can't get done within a certain amount of time, you're going to make bad decisions later on because you're going to find that those were unrealistic expectations and you've got to cut scope or you've got to cut something out of your overall approach in order to achieve that unrealistic expectation. So that's something to really keep in mind, and this is a higher risk area for private equity owned firms, even more so than other types of organizations. Regardless of how quickly you may want to move and just jump into your transformation, it's important that before you do that, you have a very clear understanding of what your implementation plan and your overall transformation strategy is. So similar to the last point about having realistic expectations, you also want to make sure it's a complete plan and that you're not just looking at this from a technology perspective or a technology implementation perspective. You also want to be looking at how are our business processes going to change? What is that future state operating model? What is our future state organizational model going to look like? How are we going to be organized as we look forward to the next 2, 3, or 5 years? Or in some cases, organizations are trying to consolidate and centralize functions as a way to increase efficiency and increase business value. Those are all things that will drive and dictate how long your overall transformation is going to take. It's more likely that those areas are going to delay or cause a longer implementation timeline or budget than the technology itself. So you really want to have a good handle on the areas outside of technology that are going to be critical to your overall transformation as part of your transformation strategy and plan. Just as you want to have a realistic understanding of what the implementation plan is, what the costs are going to be, and what the overall strategy is going to be, you want to make sure you have a realistic understanding of what's the real business value, what's the ROI out of this. We've probably by this point identified what our costs are and what the overall implementation is going to look like, but what's the business value we expect to get out of this? And that's something in some cases is easier for private equity owned firms because they're usually finance types that think that way inherently about their investments. So that's the good news. The other news is that you want to make sure you actually follow through with that, and that if you're working for an organization that's private equity owned, that you think like a private equity person and look at where the business value is and where the actual measurable business benefits might come. And it's important to view this not just in an academic, overly optimistic perspective, but more from a pragmatic operational perspective of what kind of business value and measurable business benefits can we really hold ourselves accountable to post-implementation. So in other words, as you're building your business case for your investment, it's important to look at this not just as a justification tool, but as a way to measure business benefits post-implementation so that you can make sure that you're holding yourselves accountable, but also that you're optimizing those business benefits over time. Now, we just talked about private equity-backed organizations and some of the nuances of going through a technology initiative within a PE-backed firm. Just as is the case with a lot of our clients being PE-backed, we also work with a lot of clients that are family-owned. Some of them are both. Some of them are family-owned, either second or third generation, and they've got PE involvement, or maybe they don't have PE backing yet, but they are family-owned and they've been handed down from generation to generation. And that nuance, that family-owned feel of a small business has a material impact on the way you want to approach your technology strategy and your technology initiatives. And so what I want to do in this next segment is talk about some of the lessons we have from working with family-owned businesses throughout the world, some of the nuances and cultural aspects and risk aspects of what you need to do and think about as you go through a technology initiative if you're a family-owned business. First, it helps to understand what makes a family business successful to begin with. And the thing that makes a family-owned business successful early on can oftentimes become a liability later. So let's start with what the strength is. First of all, family-owned businesses, more often than not, are people-driven. It's started by a family that's very much aligned with a common vision, a shared purpose, and they typically will build a team that's very close to the family. In many cases, there's multiple family members supporting the business. And so it becomes very people-focused, and it becomes contingent on the knowledge and the passion and the vision of the people running the business. Nothing wrong with this at all, but as I'll talk about here in a moment, that transition from a people business to a process-driven organization is very painful for some family-owned businesses as they grow and as they hand off the business to future generations of the founders of the company. So oftentimes what we see is early on in an inception of a family-owned business, there's a very strong culture because it's reflective of the culture of the family and the close friends and associates that family handpicks to help build and grow the company. There's a lot of tribal knowledge that's used to build the company. So people figure out things through trial and error, and they use sheer force and intelligence to grow the business and make decisions that make the most sense for the organization. So these are all strengths that we need to be aware of, and it provides a very good foundation for a family-owned business to be successful and to reach some of the early stages of growth. But as I'll talk about here next, organizations that are family-owned businesses ultimately need to transition from being just a people-driven business to now being more of a process and technology-driven business. And that's what I'll talk about next. So as family-owned businesses grow and scale, and this could be the original founders that experience this, but more commonly it's the descendants and the future generations of the family that experience these challenges, they find that the people-driven aspect of the business isn't enough to scale the company and get it to the next level. So oftentimes future generations of the founders will find that now they need to start getting more of a repeatable process in place, a more standardized way of operating. Something that isn't so contingent just on the people and the tribal knowledge and the culture you've built, but now is based on repeatable processes and technologies that can be used to scale and grow the company using that culture and that people-driven aspect of the business as a solid starting point foundation. So another way to look at this is in the past, when the company was younger and smaller and had less people, and more of those people were family members, you had such a strong culture and such a strong tribal knowledge base that you could make decisions and you could power through difficult times just based on that tribal knowledge and that culture. But as the company grows, there's limitations to that people-driven aspect of the business. Now we need to think about how can we be more consistent in the way we operate so that we can go hire new people that may not be affiliated with the family, and they can execute and they can grow the business and support the operations in a way that's going to grow the company without direct family members needing to manage every component of the business. So that's a painful transition for a lot of organizations, and quite frankly, that's where a lot of family-owned businesses fail, is they can't make that transition from being a people-driven business to more of a process-driven business, and they fail to recognize ways that they can use repeatable processes and repeatable technologies to help them grow the business more effectively. So in this video, I won't get into all the different ways that you can use technology and process improvements to improve your business, but if you look through and scroll through my YouTube channel and look at other videos I posted, you'll find plenty of videos about how to improve business operations, how to find the right technology for your organization. We even have top 10 rankings of different types of technologies on my YouTube channel. So be sure to just scroll through my YouTube channel and you'll find a lot of different playlists and videos that'll give you additional depth into this particular topic. But for the purpose of today's discussion, it's important to recognize that what we're trying to do as a family-owned business is go from being a people-driven business to more of a process and technology-driven business, and that transition is what we need to work through. Now, because family-owned businesses are more likely to be people-driven early on, when they make that transition over to more of a process and technology-driven organization, it disrupts the people aspect of the business. In other words, it's something that disrupts the culture. It's something that creates a sort of a longing for the way things used to be. And so it can be a very painful cultural transition for an organization to not totally abandon the people-driven component of the business that made them so successful in the first place, but instead it becomes painful in that the technology and the process focus is something that the organization never had to do before, and it feels a bit impersonal, or it can feel a bit impersonal. So as we're going through that transition and starting to add more of a layer of process and technology focus to an organization, we need to make sure that we recognize that there is going to be an impact on people, and the negative impact might actually be stronger in a family-owned business because of some of those dynamics that I've talked about. And for that reason, it's even more important for family-owned businesses to focus their efforts on organizational change and helping people navigate the changes that go along with this. And some examples of how you might navigate that would be to help ensure that you're communicating clearly why the business is going through this transition. What does it mean to the business? How are employees going to be key contributors to making that transition? How is the transition going to help the business longer term? How is it going to help them scale? And perhaps most importantly, how is it going to help them preserve the people-driven culture that they first created? One of the best ways to create success and to preserve a culture you've created in a family-owned business is to create long-term success. And the way to create long-term growth and success is to add that dimension of process and technology to augment and complement the people-driven culture that's been created early on. So the impact to people can't be overlooked. And in fact, it's even more sensitive and more important for family-owned businesses than any other sort of business because of that dynamic in the personal nature of a family-owned business. Now, for more information on how to navigate the people aspect of growth and digital transformation and new technologies, I encourage you to go to this playlist right here, which is an organizational change playlist that has a number of different videos that I've created that talk about how to navigate the people side of transformation. And hopefully that'll give you some ideas on how to navigate some of these challenges that I'm talking about here today. Finally, one of the most important things that a family-owned business can do to transition to that next level of growth is to ensure that they preserve the alignment within the organization internally amongst the team members. And what I mean by alignment is making sure that everyone's on the same page, headed in the same direction, rowing in the same direction, whatever analogy you want to use. And the reason this is so important, it's important for any business to begin with, but it's especially important for family-owned businesses because oftentimes family-owned businesses are very aligned when they first start out, but as generations take over, new non-family members enter the organization, you start to get misaligned, and suddenly you're not as aligned as you once were when the founders started the company however many years ago. So we need to focus on making sure that we get that alignment, not by brute force, but by managing the organizational components of the project and ensuring that people understand what it is we're doing and ensuring that we over-communicate perhaps more than we had to in the past when we were a smaller, more tightly knit group of people running the business. So that's a really important thing to consider is how can we ensure and focus on the overall alignment so that when we do go to implement new technologies or new process improvements to help us scale for growth, we're all on the same page, everyone understands why we're doing what we're doing, and we're all rowing in the same direction, and there's not that internal friction or tension of disagreement. Now, we see this oftentimes happen where the founders of the company are very much aligned, but even when you're handing it off to the next generation of family members, because maybe those family members didn't grow up in the business, maybe they weren't there from the start at the very beginning because they were not born yet or just not around, you end up with a certain lack of alignment that you ultimately will water down over time. And that's natural. That's something that every organization goes through, but it's especially true for family businesses. And for that reason, you want to make sure you invest that extra time to make sure you're aligned as an organization. Now, to bring this all full circle, all the things we've talked about so far, I want to share with you a case study. This is a case study of an existing client, a past client that we worked with. We helped them through the evaluation of potential technology options. We helped them with the planning phase of the project, and then we ultimately helped them with the entire implementation. So we were involved from start to finish with this small company. It's a consumer product company. You may have heard of it. I can't share with you the name, but we'll talk about the nuances of this project with our lead consultant on that project. And in this interview that I did on my podcast, we dive into what some of the lessons learned are, the things we did well, the things we didn't do well, the things we would do differently next time, some of the lessons that would apply to you too, as someone that might be going through a technology initiative as a small business. So with that being said, let's dive into this interview with Amanda Patton, who's someone from our team who led this project within our small and mid-market. This is a project that you've been working on for some time with us, but
Yes.
I guess before we start asking about the client and a little bit about the company, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, just a little bit about your background and what you do at Third Stage in general.
Okay. Sure. Well, let's see. I've been around the software world, I guess, for the past 8 to 10 years in different capacities. Was with IFS, so on the vendor side, and did global analyst relations, was an industry manager, and the strategic alliances lead. And so over the years did different roles, which was really cool because I got to see the whole entire process from different vantage points and learned a lot just from, selection and, how customers select and how they implement and what that all looks like. So it's pretty cool to have kind of a mixed bag of skill sets from, in that regard. And then at Third Stage, we tend to kind of wear multiple hats around here and work on really cool collaborative teams, and people bring, a diverse set of skill sets. And the majority of the projects that I'm on, I'm really doing project management, overall, do some analysis and a lot of, that kind of thing from organizational readiness and the selection process and that kind of thing. But really project management is kind of my go-to here lately, especially on the last few projects I've been on.
Great. So you'll have a unique perspective that a lot of us don't have, just having worked for a software vendor in the past, and you've sort of been on the other side of the table. And it'll be interesting to get your perspectives as we talk here today, sort of, what that contrast is, between being on this side versus the vendor side, and understanding those challenges in a different way, having been on that side.
Yes.
Sure.
I know all their secrets. So
Right. The dirty little secrets of
Yes.
being a vendor.
yes.
So tell us a little bit about this client. I know we can't mention him by name, obviously, for confidentiality purposes, but just tell us a little bit, at a high level, kind of what is the lay of the land as far as the company itself. What do they do? How big are they? All that good stuff.
Right. So they're consumer goods, as you have mentioned, a mature, established company, mid-size enterprise, and they sell direct to consumer and a lot of business to business as well. I don't know. I can't go into too much more detail, I guess, without revealing,
Who they are.
identities. So yeah, that's pretty much the overview.
Okay. And they're very well established, as in they've been around for centuries,
Exactly.
not
Yes.
10 or 20 years, but hundreds
Very
of years.
mature. Very, very mature.
Yeah, which is
And
can
I'll
be a
talk
good thing and a bad thing.
exactly. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about that more as we get into the interview. But as you can imagine, there's just a lot of legacy, old processes, old technologies, old ways of doing things, and also the economy and the way that we do business and the way that consumers behave and the way that they purchase things, and just that whole entire world has shifted. And so there's a lot of change going on, within this company just because of all of the evolutions they've gone through. So, and then with COVID, that's like a whole nother, fast tracked evolution. So,
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about the transformation itself that they're going through as an organization, and sort of where are they in that journey? Maybe start from, how we started working with them and kind of leading up to where we are today. How would you sort of summarize that journey so far?
So they had gotten to the point a lot of companies get to where the technology they had and the processes they had were not only not ideal, but were starting to actually hold them back. right? And so they came to us with, we just need help, right? We need help understanding what we don't know, what's available to us, looking at our current state, comparing it against other manufacturers, in similar, industries and size. And so that's really where it started. And we began with them with an organizational readiness assessment to really understand where they are around, technology, process, change. This is a really, really old system, legacy, green screen, everything's really manual. And it's almost like if you haven't been there for a long time and don't know your head, it would be really, really hard to come in off the street and use the technology to be able to do your job. And so, that causes issues with, accuracy, training, all of that kind of thing. Especially as you bring kind of in a younger, more tech savvy workforce, people expect for their systems at work to reflect, the way we do things in our regular lives using our phones and that kind of thing. So, there was just a huge disconnect between what they have and what they want to have. It started the selection process, right, where we go out and we start that, of course, with the process workshops, where it's this, painstaking but really cool and exciting exploration with the teams across, sales, customer service, production, across all the big functional areas, taking us step by step, what exactly do you do? And really laying out that in the way of, process maps and that, which helps us to really understand what are the requirements, what is current state, not what you want people to think it is, but what it actually is. And then what's future state, right? Where are we going? Where do we want to be? And what do we need from a process and technology perspective to be able to get there? And then running the actual selection, right? Doing analysis on all of the requirements and doing the demonstrations and having the customer weigh in on scoring those demonstrations. And then having two top vendors. Sometimes it's more, but in this case it was two. And they basically have a showdown and compete for the business. And then we had a winner, of course. And then now we are deep into the implementation, right? The design phase, we're getting ready to do user acceptance testing. And we're a couple months from go live. So we're pretty well into the project now.
Nice. Yeah, very, very interesting. It's sort of like getting a lay of the land and understanding who they are and what they're trying to be in the future, so that we can figure out what system or systems would be the best fit for them.
Exactly.
So that was a good overview of sort of where they are in the process, what sort of triggered or initiated this whole transformation. What type of technology, we try to be pretty vendor agnostic. We are vendor agnostic as an organization, but in these discussions and podcasts, we try to be fairly vendor agnostic and not, bash any one vendor or be overly positive about any vendors in general. But what can you tell us about the type of solution that we ended up recommending and that they ended up implementing?
Yes, I'm not going to get too specific, but I will just say, it's a solution that's built for manufacturing, right? And so you have all of the functionality that you would expect for that type of company, and all the bells and whistles that you would expect to find for a company who manufactures. So, a lot of manufacturers tend to be on premise, and there's been a huge shift, right? Or there is, I guess we're kind of in it now, where, people are trying to modernize their systems and people are going to the cloud, and there's all these big questions, and there's a lot of, it's hard to leave behind all of the things that they're kind of used to. And so it was even a huge change management component, I guess, or the beginnings of it, where it's such the delta is so massive between green screen, hotkeys and all the things that people do and have been doing forever, to this modern, where things are more icons, and it's just very different, right? So I think it was off-putting, but also exciting for them. But the vendors we pulled in obviously were based on who can satisfy the requirements. So for them, it was pretty much all manufacturing centric technologies solutions.
Right. So they end up with a sort of a tier two industry focused solution rather than, it wasn't an SAP or an Oracle or a Microsoft, sort of one of those big broad vendors. It was more of a focused solution.
Right. And I think that would have been over engineered for them given their size and what they're trying to do anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in the process so far, I guess first of all, where in the implementation are we right now in helping them? So what phase of the overall implementation, or kind of what's next? What are some of the immediate milestones we have coming up?
So last week, actually, we just finished the end-to-end, just the full, end-to-end, and we're getting into now preparing for UAT. And really the specifics of, writing all the scripts for the user acceptance testing, make sure it's not boilerplate, right? That we have really specific nuances to this particular client, understanding that they do have a secret sauce. They do have ways they do things that differentiate them from their competitors. And so, getting into looking at what happened in the end-to-end, what's working, what's not. Massive decades upon decades worth of data is being continually deduped and scrubbed and reformatted and just all of that, right? And so a lot of that's getting moved over from pilot to production. There's just a lot of those types of things as we prepare to be able to test. But that's where we are now, right? Deep preparation for user acceptance testing.
Okay. Yeah. So this is where a lot of the rubber meets the road, and a lot of the challenges and hiccups and all that sort of stuff starts to get exposed, really, is during that end-to-end process design, and then the user acceptance testing, as you mentioned. What are some of the challenges that we've seen so far? Just kind of looking at where we are in the journey with them right now. What are some of the biggest challenges we're facing now, or that we faced so far leading up to now?
Well, like I said earlier, and this continues to just be a theme, it's just a massive change, right? Legacy green screen, essentially very manual, institutional knowledge kind of thing. And very, you've got to go in and mine for data and like build custom report. It's not the way we're used to, where you can just go query for what you want. There's just a lot of, so I think one of the biggest challenges is like not knowing what they don't know. And with each iteration of these design and configuration sessions and these conversations, and then all the sidebar conversations happening around business processes and like what needs to change and why does it need to change, and does everyone agree that it needs to change, and also not operating in their own little silos, but making sure that everyone had this broad view across all the teams of like, if we make this change, this is going to impact this over here. What does that mean from a process perspective, technology perspective? So I think that's one of the huge challenges, is just you're asking an entire corporation to recalibrate and shift perspective individually and collectively, which is, it's a lot to ask. There's also the stress of learning an entirely new system, right? That looks nothing like what you're used to. If you're going from one modern ERP to another, it's probably not that big of an adjustment, right? But when you're going from, legacy to what they're going to be using, it's been huge. We've also had a lot of, issues with the vendor that's caused heartburn. Some of these things can't really be predicted. It just depends on who the team is, the consultants that are deployed from the vendor side, the project manager, their product roadmap, what changes they're going on, what changes they have going on behind the scenes. And so making sure that, we as the neutral party, right, in the overall project, that we are advocating for the customer, that we are kind of giving the vendor a really hard time sometimes when they're not doing what they said they were going to do. In the sales cycle, it was said like this is what we're actually seeing. What's the deal? Creating mitigation plans, asking for, rebates or things like that. Just making sure, because look, the customer, they have a full-time job to be doing, for one thing. They have a day job to keep the company running. They also now have a part to full-time, depending on their role in the project, on this implementation. The last thing they could be working 60, 80 hours a week for a period of time to get this thing implemented, depending on their involvement. The last thing they have time to do or the capacity to do is go chase down the, things that the vendor said that aren't necessarily happening the way they should be. So it's really good to have a neutral party, because like we've talked about before, at some point we roll off of these projects. This is a long-term relationship between the client and the vendor. And so I am always working to make them, get them to communicate with each other. And I will be, the bad cop or whatever. I'm happy to do that. But to have that communication, to know who to escalate to, who do I go to? Where do I submit a ticket? How do I make sure that this has been, resolved, those kinds of things. And there are just so many people involved that can get really, really chaotic very quickly. So, I think that's one of the main things right now.
So you and I were talking before we went live here. We were talking about how we're working with the vendor's direct services group. So in other words, we're not using a third-party VAR or a system integrator. This is actually the vendor itself providing the technical resources to manage the implementation, which in theory, you'd think that should be an easier, more smooth sailing process because you're dealing directly with the vendor. We're getting resources straight from the vendor.
Right.
Who better to know the product than the vendor themselves? And so in theory, it should be a easier process, or you should, in theory, have better resources because of that. Now, but that hasn't necessarily been the case, has it? I mean, there's been some challenges that we do see often, but we don't see them with all of our implementations. You and I were talking about another implementation you're involved with where it's like just a totally different experience.
Right.
What are some of the challenges with the vendor? Like, what are some examples of challenges we've run into with the vendor themselves?
So to your point, every single project is completely unique, right? It's because it deals with human beings and different technologies, different deployment teams. And so every single one is completely different. And I was under the same impression as well, because you would think that, people who are employees of the vendor, that would be better, right? It would be closer to the source instead of having a bunch of, outsourced things. But, what's ended up happening is that there's just a lot of disjointed disorganization, miscommunication. A lot the vendor has going on behind their own scenes has caused a lot of pain for the customer. There are a lot of upgrades and, just a lot going on with their product roadmap. Let me just say that. And
Right.
so those changes are causing glitches and delays and confusion for the process of the implementation for the client, right? Because how everything is, you've got this critical path, you've got all these dependencies. And so if this thing gets messed up, well, now we've got to rework all of, if somebody, that's one of the issues we've had with this vendor, is that they've laid things out and then those things are continually changing. It's like chasing a moving target. And it's really difficult when, like I said, you've got people over here trying to learn a new system. They're trying to write new processes for future state of their company. They're trying to work their day jobs. and their schedules are really full, right? And so it's just caused a lot of extra, heartburn. Another thing too, I don't know if you've ever, called customer service somewhere and you've been transferred 17 times and you've had to tell your story over every single time.
Right.
Even though the person says like, yeah, I'm going to put this in the notes. That has sort of been the experience for the customer as well, right? Even though you have these are, employees of the vendors. It's not like it's a new outsourced team or some third party team. This is all, people who work for the vendor. But every time they come on to talk about building out a new module or a new, component, we've had quite a few experiences where the cloud environment hasn't been spun up yet, right? Oh, we thought you were on-prem. Sorry, we need 2 weeks now to spin up the cloud environment so we can do this training and this configuration, things like that. We don't have 2 weeks, right? Also, that pushes so many other things back now. And then just kind of the thing where you get on the phone and you expect your, if you're the client, you expect the vendor to know who you are, what you do, how big you are, where you're located, your whole story, and the fact that you're on the cloud and that you're using this product and that, and that just has been missing. Right? It's almost like they have to tell their story from the beginning every single time. And that obviously hurts confidence. It makes people feel worried. It makes people feel like, is this implementation going to go well? What's going to happen on go live? It doesn't seem like they're really paying attention to what we want and what we need. So that's been a huge frustration. And like I said, you have, I would say, I'm trying to remember from the organizational readiness assessment, I think it was 89, 90% of the people who work for this company have never been through an ERP implementation ever. So this process, the methodology, all the meetings, all the acronyms, all the just the language, everything about it is completely foreign, right? And so people are already a little bit, just worried and insecure. It's a new experience for them. I think that's completely normal. And it doesn't help when the vendor shows up and seems like they don't know what's going on, right? It's really frustrating. So,
yeah. Now you had mentioned too, you were talking a few minutes ago about just now you were talking about the different modules, you setting up different modules and all that goes into that. So you've got so many dimensions of things to think about from a technology or a software perspective here. You have the different modules you're going to use, whether it's cloud or on-prem, and a lot of things are specific to that solution. But then there's also, in this case, and in many cases with a lot of our clients, there's third-party bolt-ons that go along with that to fill in some of the voids with the product roadmap, to your point earlier.
right.
If this product doesn't have certain functionality, we don't have it, but here's a third-party option that could sort of fill that gap. There's been issues with that as well, have there not? Or what are some of those challenges with those third-party apps and how it all sort of comes together?
Yes. Lack of communication, again, finding out at this stage in the process that things that were bought, in the sales process now, oh, well, we're sunsetting that. We're coming out with this new thing to replace it, but it's not going to be available to work with single sign-on in a cloud environment until June of next year. And so you're like, well, what are they supposed to do between go live and when that happens? And so again, lack of communication, maybe even from, the product people to the sales team. Maybe the sales team didn't know about this during the sales process. I'm not saying there was any malice or like intentional misleading going on. It's just, in my mind, and the reason we're here and we're vendor agnostic is because we advocate for the client. We are here for the client. That's where my loyalty lies. And so it's frustrating when those types of things are being revealed so late in the process, because then you have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, do we really need this functionality? Do we really need it day one? How critical is it? And trying to figure, out kind of workarounds really to make sure that the functionality is available. The other thing too is what they purchased initially in the sales cycle to cover that particular functionality that I'm referring to. The new product is going to be more expensive, right? So then there's a hit to the budget as well. And so, and then maybe potentially some APIs and some other, work that has to go on behind the scenes to make it work, because now it's a different, so again, it's never one thing. It ends up going down 50 different rabbit holes because it's connected to so many other components of the project. So we've had quite a few issues with modules that were bolt-ons that actually serve really important functionality that the client needs. So again, we're now talking about UAT, and we've got all these scripts, and we're getting everybody ready, and we're doing all the training around that, making sure that the data is there and that all the EDI work is being done. talking about cutover planning and getting really, really granular about what that's going to look like during that time. And so we need to be focused on those things. And instead, we've gotten dragged back sometimes to kind of go rework some of these modules and things. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, you'd also mentioned a moment ago, you were talking about the organizational readiness and how 89 or 90% of the employees had never been through an implementation. And then you throw in some of these curveballs we're talking about that are vendor specific and related to the third party bolt-ons, and just some of the confusion around the product itself and which modules and bolt-ons are going to be required. But what about just the whole challenge? I guess the whole the fact that this is such a mature organization that's well established, which is good news, bad news, I suppose, when they're going through a change like this. The good news is that you have a certain amount of maturity around certain processes and certain things you do that are strengths as an organization. But when it comes time to change those things or to go through a transformation like this, the bad news is it can be a lot more difficult for a well-established organization to go through the changes just because of that. Things are so well baked into the DNA of the organization that it's a lot harder to change. What have some of the biggest organizational change challenges or signs of resistance have you seen as it relates to the process changes or moving to a modern cloud-based ERP system versus that legacy system? What are some of the how's that going so far from what you're seeing at this point in the project?
I will say we're turning a corner. I'll put it like that. Early on, it was people are, it's human nature, right? You're attached to the way that you do things and protective over your process and your data and the fact that you own this and other people don't touch it. And, this is how we do things. I think too, when you have somebody who's been doing it this way for 30 years, and that's not an exaggeration, there are people who've been doing it this way on this system for 30 years. There has been a little bit of a mindset of why do we need to change it? It's fine. And so that's not a bad thing. And you talk about this all the time in your podcasts and blogs and all that of people aren't necessarily trying to be resistors. It's just a natural part of the process. And so I think for this particular client, one of the hardest things, besides just the huge change from the type of technology they're using to where they're going, is the internal processes, right? Having pretty passionate discussions sometimes internally about this is why we do it like this. And other people or newer people or whatever, people in different areas, well, that doesn't make sense. That's not how people do it anymore. And so some of those conversations have been revisited, I'm not kidding, 7 or 8 times, right? Subsequent meetings, you got to pull in more people, we've got to reevaluate this and looking at, well, why do we use LIFO and why do we do it like this? And why are there 4 extra steps in this process when really all we need, and this is the whole crux of the issue, is that they don't know what the new technology is capable of. So they don't know that a lot of these manual steps that are part of their process are going to be obsolete. And you can't know that until you've played with and tested and seen your new system in action. And so there's a little bit of, trust. And like I said, every iteration of the UAT and them getting to get in there and play around and see it, like, oh, okay, well, it did it automatically, or this is automated now, or I don't have to slice and dice these 17 reports 8 different ways for 15 different people, because that's sort of the way it is now, right? You're pulling vast amounts of data, you're putting it into Excel, you're doing a million different things because all these people need different things. And in future state, it's not going to be like that. There won't be a need for that, right? There's going to be custom dashboards and there are reports you can query. There are all kinds of things that you can do to do that. But if you've never seen that kind of system or worked in that kind of system, you don't know. So I think that's one of the biggest change management issues, is telling people this is what it's going to be like, and they don't believe you. And so, but like I said, the more, because initially when people are in there playing around in the training modules and those types of things, it falls flat because it's not real. But now that their data is in there and they see their customer names and they see their sales orders and they see, now it's starting to all make sense. Like, okay, I'm really starting to understand how this works. So that's been a pretty steep learning curve. And I think too, just being patient with people, and understanding that change is hard, and not trying to shame someone or make them feel like, come on, get with it. It's everyone has a very different reaction and different experience. I think too, it's always normal for people to start to think, this system seems to do a lot of what I do for my job. Right. And people are like, what, and that's kind of one of the points of, this type of system is to get people away from having to be in the weeds all the time and do so much manual work so people can focus on more strategic, forward-looking initiatives, right? Instead of being caught up in the work of all this manual stuff when you're bogged down with an old system. So.
Yeah. Now you mentioned something interesting that just triggered another sort of a sub question here is you were talking earlier, but just a second ago about LIFO, like, which for those that don't know, last in, first out way of valuing or costing inventory. And it's also an inventory management process too. But are there other, can you give us a couple examples of other impacts to the organization, like other things like that are sort of being challenged, or their mindset shifts for the organization or for different team members, no matter how small they may be? Do you have any examples like that?
I think, one of the things is I'm trying not to get too specific so I don't, reveal anything that I'm not supposed to reveal, but, what are the kind of rules, right? In terms of customizations, or this customer wants this. And that's been one of the huge things. When you're as old as this company is and you have as many longtime loyal customers as they do, you have a lot of exceptions, right? For customers. This customer only can have blue ink on their packing slip, or, this customer doesn't want this packaged with that. It has to be separated out, and these plastic sleeves have to be labeled in a different way because of how they receive inventory or whatever. Special custom orders that a lot of companies would just say no to, right? Because it doesn't make sense at that volume. It doesn't make sense for them financially to fulfill those types of things. But this company does those things without exception because they're customer centric. And so a lot of it has been around the rules of what's allowed and what's not allowed, and setting, parameters around what's going to work for the business model. And across customer service, sales, production, there were these kind of arguments about this may be better for the company from a convenience standpoint, but we don't care because we're always going to do what's best for our customer. And so those are some examples. And like I just said, the color of ink or the way things are packaged, or, just teeny tiny details that may not seem that important in the grand scheme of things, but to them they are, because they have a really loyal customer base. I'm trying to think of some other just small process things. I'll think of something. It'll come to me.
No, that's a good one. I mean, but it's a good, even just the minute example of the color of ink, on a invoice or what a packing slip looks like, or how you, how you separate the materials into different, I forgot how you said it, but how you package things for specific customers. You look at that in a software vendor would probably look at that and say, well, that's not best practice. Our software has best practice, which is a more consistent way of doing things. And so that's what drives me crazy about that term best practices, because in this case, you look at this client and say, well, is that best practice? The way the software works, is that really best practice when you have this customer centric customer experience that you're focused on? And those two things are oftentimes in conflict. And so you've got to, resolve that and say, well, are we going to focus on efficiency and standardization and common processes, or are we going to retain that sort of customer centric model that we have. And I think that's where a lot of companies struggle, is like, what's the right answer
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, and if you don't know ERP speak, and you don't know what a future state looks like with this new system, you may just be able to be pulled around by the vendor, right? If they tell you you should do this, maybe you just do it because you don't know, you're not sure, and so you think, well, they're the experts, I guess we'll just do whatever they're saying. But and like you say this a lot in your stuff that you do is about, you've got to know what makes you special, right? And sometimes, yes, there's a lot of best practices that can be applied across the board, but those are probably going to be pretty similar for most in that particular industry. But if you know that something is a key differentiator, and is the reason why your customers keep coming back, then regardless of best practice or not, or what the vendor thinks about it, you know your business better than anyone. Like, a vendor can't tell you how your business is on a day-to-day basis. You're the one who knows it. You do it every single day. So you have to be the source of those decisions. And, would it be easier to go with best practice to make things more convenient for the company? Yes. At the expense of their customer experience, though, which they're not willing to do, right? Which is why they're so successful. So, you have to pick and choose those things. And sometimes those things require customizations, right? And that costs a little bit more money, and it's going to take a little bit more time. But in the end, it's important for this customer to be able to do that for this client to be able to do that for their customers. And there's all these little conversations about backflushing. Should we be backflushing? Should we auto invoice? There's price breaks. Where should the price break happen? We have, they're putting out catalogs with new pricing. But these old customers are grandfathered in at this rate for all of eternity, right? And all of that has to be accounted for in the software. So I think that's really what it is,
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. Now, how, in general, I don't know if you have a good answer for this yet, just because I know we're in the middle of things, but if you do have a good answer for this, I'd be curious to see what you think. When you look at the sort of that call it a tension or a trade-off between sort of vanilla software deployment and sort of what the software can do off the shelf versus business processes and some of the stuff you were just talking about, some of the variations and exceptions and things that are focused on making the customers happy.
Right.
Assuming those two things are in conflict often, sort of where's the needle? Is the needle shifting? Which way is it going? Like how is that? How do you see that unfolding so far? Because I'm always curious about that, because I feel like that's such a key point of tension. That's hard to get alignment as an organization on where you want to fall. And to your point, the vendor's probably pushing you more towards the vendor focused or the product focused answer, and that may or may not be the right business answer. So how do you see, I don't know if you have a good way to explain like where you think this customer is and where they're headed on that front.
We are in the thick of it right now, so I can report back later.
Sure.
But a big part of it is, so like, for example, right when we started taking inventory of, okay, here's everything out of the box. Here's what we know future state. Here's what we learned in end to end. Here's what we've learned in the build sessions that we've been in, and all the subsequent conversations that needed to happen around business process. We, I think, came out with 83 customizations, right? Whether those be forms, BPMs, reports, dashboards, like any type of customization, right? And so the process right now that we're going through is pretty painstaking, long conversations about, is it something that we really need? Is it something we need right now? Are we sure that the out-of-the-box functionality doesn't address this? We just haven't looked at it in the right way yet, right? And so it's just that exploration of all of that. Of those 83 customizations, probably for phase one, for go live, there'll probably be about 8 to 10 that get moved forward. And so it's not straightforward. A lot of time the vendor wants to make it seem like it's straightforward, like it's like, oh, we'll just do this, right? Well, no, that's not going to work. And so, of course, that sets off a lot of other conversations. And it's been a really good exercise, I think, in the company really better understanding themselves and each other and where they've been, where they are now, and where they want to go. Even though everyone's agreed that future state is where they want to be and be able to project trends and get better with like the whole Amazon world and, selling directly to consumers and 3PLs and all the, all the new things that have come in. It's still this, when people get worried or afraid or confused, we want to go back to what we know, right? And so it's like a rubber band, and it's depending on the day, right? We can be anywhere on that spectrum. But I think the more that these conversations happen, they take a lot of time. And yeah, the easy thing is just to do what the vendor says, right? Okay, let's just shove you guys into a box that the functionality says that you should be in. Sometimes that makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. So I think it's been a really good exercise. It's been very eye-opening, I think, as departments understand what other departments are dealing with and kind of what that looks like. And there's a lot of overlap. There's a bunch of learning opportunities that they've had across different functional areas. So yeah, I don't have a direct answer.
Sure.
It's
No,
in flux. It's in flux. Yeah.
Well, that's super helpful because, I think you said it well when you said, vendors do try to kind of force you into a box. And I think for a lot of organizations, you want to assume that whatever product or technologies you're deploying is the best fit of what, what options are out there in the marketplace. In this case, it sounds like, this probably is the best fit product for this client, but that doesn't mean it's a perfect fit. And it doesn't mean that the vanilla off-the-shelf software is going to address all of their needs. There are going to be things that are going to have to change on the technology side, and certainly the organization itself is going to have to change to adapt to the software. So it's sort of a two-prong change approach. But I think a lot of vendors would, to your point, they tend to oversimplify things and say, well, just do it the way the software does it. Well, that's easy to say when you're a software vendor because that's all you know, and
Exactly.
you don't have to live with the consequences day to day once you go live on that new system. And I think that's where, I think it's good that some of those painstaking conversations are happening right now because that's a way to work through and make sure you've got clarity and alignment on what is it we can live with, what can't we live with, what do we need to change ourselves, what do we need to change in the software and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we're, that's where third stage comes in, is sort of that neutral party that can see across all the, the whole entire project, across the different dynamics and people jockeying for power and just all the different dynamics that are going on, which is just normal human nature, and being willing to have those difficult conversations and, not get too far into the weeds, but deep enough to where, okay, this is not going to work for us the way we need it to. And just having the vendor be accommodating, and you don't have to get a custom built house. But if you move into a house that's already been built and it's builder's grade, it works, the light fixtures work and the stuff works, but it may not be exactly what you want. I think that's the process we're going through, is like, it's okay, but it's not going to do it the way we need it to be done. And then having that discussion about, is it worth the extra money? Is it worth the extra time? Do we need the customization? What if we wait until phase 2 and let phase 1 really play out and just see how we're doing after go live for a few months? And then we can do a reassessment around some of these. And I think those 83 items are going to get moved at 8 to 10. And then the rest of them maybe will be pushed for a while because, like I said, they don't know yet what it's going to be like in the real world on their new system. So having the patience, and then of course having the processes written for workarounds and manual things in case something doesn't work, right? Being prepared for everything. So
right. Yeah that makes total sense. So what based on where the project is right now and some of the challenges that that the client and us are facing here, what are some of the biggest takeaways you would leave for a team that's about to go through a similar sort of transformation? Are there lessons specific to this client, this project that you'd say, here's some key takeaways or things to think about as you embark on your own transformation journey?
How much time do we have?
We could spend a whole hour just on that, but how would you summarize a couple of those things that, the most immediate or highest priority things that come to mind?
I would say to allow more time than you think it's going to take. That's a big one. And I've already alluded to it several times. That means internal discussions across all teams. leaving that extra time to discover and explore things that are going to come up. I don't care how well planned out it is, there will be surprises and speed bumps in the road. And so having the time set aside for that. You also have to have time to let the steering committee and the board, right? Because that can take forever to get on people's calendars, to track them down, to let them look over the information. You may have to present the information to them so that they can go make a decision. When it's really stuff that really has to be decided at a super high level, that has, costs more time than we anticipated in some cases. UAT scripts, the data migration plan, again, more time than you would think, right? So put a 20%, insurance layer in there of time, because like we've talked about, people have full-time day jobs. They now have a ton of hours being added for the implementation. And so finding the time that we need for all these deep conversations sometimes that we have to have, it's really difficult to do. In fact, sometimes we're doing it at night or on weekends because there's no other time, right? What else? The EDI hardware definitely, especially right now with our global supply chain being clogged, that's a fun little surprise of it's taking how long to get the scanners, the scan guns and the printers and everything, right? You've got to have that stuff for go live. And so having months of lead time is really important, especially right now. Luckily we were prepared for that, so we're good. But if we hadn't been, we might be in trouble. I think having an extensive plan with every line item laid out, who's responsible, when it's due. Even if we're just coming in, even if third stage is just coming in from a QAPM perspective, I still like to have everything covered. So because we have our team, we have the system integrator, we have the vendor, we have the client team. It's a lot of teams with a lot of lenses and a lot of deliverables going on. And so being able to track all of that, which is what I do, I want to track everything. For this one in particular, I would talk about, wanting to understand the vendor's roadmap. And if they're going through a huge upgrade or they have a lot going on behind the scenes, knowing ahead of time before you sign a contract, what does this mean? What does this look like? And getting really specific and kind of beating them up on, getting answers, definitive answers. Any products that are being sold during the sales cycle, when you get around to implementing, has anything changed? Do you have any updates for us? What do we need to know? Is this going to work in the cloud? Does it work in a single sign-on environment? Just all these little details that, don't seem like a big deal until they don't work, right? And then it's a really, really big deal. And then if you have a client going from on-prem to cloud, just making sure that everyone understands the changes, the challenges, the benefits of what that actually means. Because a lot of times these older companies, will be on-prem and the cloud is just a whole nother universe, right? And what does that mean for all these customizations and all of that? And every single time there's an update, what is that going to look like for our internal IT team? And just really, really understanding, because again, it's a completely different world. So that's kind of a long list. I have many more, but those are the main ones that come to mind.
Those are good ones, especially, I like the part about the way you describe all the little things that are big things that can affect a timeline. There's a big difference between what a vendor says they could do in terms of implementing technology in theory versus implementing technology to fit a business and in actuality. Those two things oftentimes get disconnected in what the vendor thinks is possible versus what is realistically possible from an organizational and operational perspective.
Yeah, and I would also say too, that coming from the vendor side, just remember that there's salespeople, and really doing due diligence on, oh yeah, sure, we can do that, right? Really understanding what that's going to look like, and also understanding how much of the hand-holding is going to be done by the vendor. I think I had a much greater expectation of this particular vendor than what has been delivered. And so there's been quite a bit of disappointment and heartburn and even conflict at some points in the project, right? And it was explained during the sales cycle that this customer was not familiar with an ERP implementation and we're going to need a lot of extra help and assistance, and that has not been delivered. So a lot of times, if you've been working for a vendor for 30 years, all the acronyms and all the things you say, it makes perfect sense to you because you do it every single day. And making sure that that vendor really cares about that customer in a way that's going to explain things, break down the acronyms. What does this mean? How long is this going to take? How do we do this? How do we write a UAT script? How do we write? Saying something needs to be done and understanding actually what it looks like to get it done, to write a plan to get it done, and helping your people, training your people on how to do it. There's just been a big gulf between what was expected and what's being delivered. So,
yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. I mean, there's a very good. I think that's a good overview of some of the higher priority obstacles and challenges and pitfalls that organizations often face. We see that a lot of those things you mentioned, we see often with our other clients as well, and that's part of what we do is help manage and navigate those issues. So I hope this training has given you a solid foundation to get started on your technology initiative at your small or mid-sized company. If you'd like to learn more about how to be successful, I encourage you to reach out to me. Feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or YouTube, send me a message, and I'd love to chat with you about how to make your project successful. I've also included my contact information below, so you can reach out to me directly that way via email. And you can also look below for more resources that I've included that I think will help you through your small business initiative. A number of different guides and white papers and resources that are designed specifically for small businesses. So be sure to check that out in the links below. I hope that you found this information useful, and I hope you have a great day.